What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm hanging out with Dustin Zimmerman and Cam Selby. Today, we are going to be talking about the wide receiver position for the 2025 NFL Draft. We're going to be ranking, and we're going to be talking about some guys that are, really exciting. This is a overall down wide receiver class. If you're just looking at this year versus last year, you're going to be like, oh, well, and there's some, last year was just special. But there's a lot of really, really good day two guys, and it's a really deep class. So, I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, we have this is kind of the Wild West in terms of receivers just because it's a down year, but we're just waiting for people to take the reins and stuff like that. A couple did at the combine and kind of changed our minds on some things, and a couple people did not live up to it. So it's going to be exciting to talk to.
Here we go. So, starting off, we're going to talk about our honorable mentions group. Unfortunately, we have to talk about some of these guys because they did not do as well at the combine also. As Cam just mentioned, some of them doing well. The first guy on the board is Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson is I don't even know if he's 155 whole pounds. So, so Tez Johnson, though, he is a guy that just knows how to get open. But he ran a 4.51, I believe, at the combine, so it wasn't as impressive as we were hoping. He really needed to impress with his physical and athletic abilities at the combine, especially after saying that he was going to break the record for the fastest 40 of all time and then not even coming close to that. So, but funny enough, he's honestly pretty unguardable at the NCAA level. And he is one of the hardest guys to place out of everybody that I've watched film on, top to bottom, for this whole draft class because of the fact that if he does well at the NFL level, we're going to have to set a new precedent that it doesn't really matter what you run or how athletic you are or how big you are. You just got, if you're good at football, you're good at football. So he's one of those guys that we're going to be getting into and talking about. But he's an interesting player for sure and probably one we've never seen before in this style. The next guy is Xavier Restrepo. He was the first team All-American, right-hand man for Cam Ward. He had 2.8% drop rate, which is really good. He had an 87.1 man grade, awesome. And he had 6 games of 100 plus yards. His calling card is toughness. He's willing to run any route. He's willing to block. He's willing to get after it. And I really appreciate that always. But I do think that he has some restrictions as a player because he's probably restricted to the slot, probably won't be able to play outside. He's not an elite athlete by any means. He's not a deep threat. He is more quick than he is fast. And so I worry about that. But he has great hands. He's a good run blocker. Like I said, he finds space well. He's great against the zone schemes. So he's an interesting player, and he could help a team out a lot in that, if he goes in that round 3, round 4 type of thing. Next guy's Pat Bryant. Torrey Horton. Torrey Horton missed a lot of this year. Due to injury, but he did come back and run at the combine, which was great to see. He ran a legit 4.42 after having a full year off and being very injured. So I'm really happy to see that out of him. He had a really good 2023, so he's a guy that has to bounce back, but from what he showed in 2023, I have some optimism with him, which is good to see. Then, as I was saying, Pat Bryant. Pat Bryant is a guy that is a possession receiver, willing to block, strong, physical guy. And he's actually a guy that I'm excited about just for, stylistic matchups and stuff like that. I think that he could go to a team that could use him in a lot of different ways, especially blocking, because he is so good at that. And then possession receiver, capable of helping in the red zone and things like that. So he's an interesting player. I just don't think he has the ceiling that some of the other guys do, and that's why he's behind them. And then the last guy on this list is Eftim Chisholm III out of Eastern Washington. And I had to put him on here because he is obviously trying to follow in the footsteps of Mr. Cooper Kupp. Eftim Chisholm had 120 receptions this year. That's the most of anybody on the list. 1,311 yards, 13 touchdowns. He had a 2.4% drop rate. Really solid. Problem is, he's probably restricted to the slot also, but he absolutely killed the Shrine Bowl. So he came up to the competition and said, I'm that guy. He's just one of the hardest guys to scout because of the fact that he's coming out of Eastern Washington. But he's one of those guys that I'm excited and hoping that he is better and gets, hopefully he's not undrafted. But if he is undrafted, at least he gets to pick his team more so than going in the 7th round and stuff like that. So he's a very interesting player because he's great against zone coverage. He's super good against zone coverage. So yeah, these are our guys.
Yeah, Tez Johnson, like you said, is one of the most confusing prospects in that I can remember, just because 155 soaking wet, and everybody last year was talking about with Xavier Worthy's 4.21 speed that he broke the combine record, and he's really skinny and scrawny, and so how are you going to hold up in the NFL? Well, he had a very solid rookie year and in a great postseason, but he's like 20 pounds heavier than him, and he runs 3/10 faster. So yeah, his 40 was really, really disappointing to be in the 4.5s, but at the same time, he had the fastest 3-cone drill by a full tenth over the next best guy. So it's just like, what do we do with him? Just put him on the field, I guess. Give the ball in his hands. He's like, I would just kind of compare it to Kevontae Turpin. Is like, I don't know what Kevontae is, but just give him the ball and let him run. That's kind of how I view him. Restrepo is probably the most notable name on the list out of anybody because of him being the true wide receiver 1 in Miami during Cam Ward's great year, and really solid guy. And then Torrey Horton, like you said, suffered a knee injury this year that was limited himself, but not many people had multiple 1,100-plus yard seasons as a receiver in this class. So, him coming out and running was a positive sign, and so he's a late-round guy that could possibly be some kind of sleeper in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tez Johnson, we talked about it on some of the other videos, but game speed versus just what he did in the 40, just insanely fast and quick, when he's running his routes. And then the 40 I expected to be faster, but again, with all the film we've seen, he's such an enigma. It'll be interesting to see how it translates from college to the NFL. Like you said, unguardable at Oregon, but will that still be the case? Is he going to put on size? What's going to happen once he takes that next step? And then Xavier Restrepo, I've talked about him a lot, obviously. He's just Mr. Consistent over there for the last few years at Miami. Like you said, probably limited to the slot. He's not going to be the game breaker per se by any means, but he's going to be, he's been a decent wide receiver. Again, will make a play when he's needed, can run his routes as needed. A good kind of floor guy.
For sure. Yeah. All right. Tier 5. These are the guys 14 to 12. And Kyle Williams, he made himself some money when, again, and I don't have an age for him. I don't know why. So certain guys, you just can't find their date of birth, and so I don't have an age for him. But he's a 5th-year senior. Kyle Williams out of Washington State. He was Cam Ward's number 1 receiver when Cam Ward was at Washington State last year. And he's very consistent player. He had 14 touchdowns this year, which was very impressive. He was the Senior Bowl guy. You know what I mean? Like, when you go to the Senior Bowl, certain guys stand out that you didn't really know the name of. He was one of those guys that really stood out that I didn't really know the name of before. 89.7 man grade, which is awesome. He's explosive speed. He creates separation very quickly off the line of scrimmage. As you know, with speed comes after catch, beats angles, and he's actually pretty good at running through arm tackles. So he's a big play threat. He had 3 plays of 57 or more this year. Good route runner. Acceleration to deceleration is really good. Having that speed allows him to decelerate, and I think his game speed is faster than his 40 time. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. So that was good to see. He's alignment versatile. He had 348 snaps out wide and 119 in the slot, so he can do both. But there are some cons. Inconsistency, just disappears at time. And we've had players in the past that we've scouted that were like, that guy disappears. But, Keon Coleman disappearing at, 6'4" versus Kyle Williams disappearing at 5'11" is a little bit of a different skill set, Mm-hmm. He's not a great run blocker. He's not going to help you in that. Contested catches isn't going to go up over somebody. It's not he's still 5'11". So his height and his length are definitely limiting. And then limited route tree when he was actually at Washington State. He didn't run an insane amount of routes, so I think that could be an issue. He was really either a screen or deep guy for most of his plays, so missed out on some of those plays where he ran across the middle of the field and stuff like that. Next up is Jack Besh. Jack Besh had a tragic story with his brother Was on Bourbon Street when the accident happened down there in New Orleans. So he lost his life, and Jack turned it into, of course it was a sad time, but Jack turned it into an extreme positive in his football career, using it to be the Senior Bowl wide receiver MVP and game MVP, which is great to see. He's a great run blocker. He's an ex tight end. When he got to school at LSU, he was a tight end. Then he moved to TCU. They put him at receiver. He's a physical player with great hands. 1.6% drop rate is awesome. Awesome. So he's just that kind of like physical contact balance post catch receiver that is going to. He's kind of like the Cam Scattaboo of the wide receivers, where he's working hard at all times and he's giving full effort all the time. So intense player, feels like a leader. Some cons though, he's only had one big year, so that's an issue. He doesn't really have long speed. He's not going to run away from anybody, so his separation is bad. So that's some things that we're going to have to talk about, because he's not the most dominant receiver, and if you don't have separation and long speed, those things can really hurt you in the long run. And then the last guy is a combine guy that really stood out was Jalen Knoll. He was productive, 81 catches for 1,194 yards and 8 touchdowns. Special teams asset, was a good return guy. And then his route running is pretty solid. Like, he's got good burst, sells vertically, and acceleration, deceleration. He had one of the highest RAS scores of all relative athletic scores of all receivers at the combine. He's a tough guy, but he has some cons. His drop rate, he had some like atrocious drops. Not like, I know his drop rate's 4.8, but like he had some drops where he was wide open by himself and dropped the ball. And then of course, being the size and frame he is, I don't know if he's going to be restricted to the slot, but I would expect him to. And then his run blocking was just, he's just a small guy. He's 5'10", 195. So.
Yeah, with these three guys, kind of very similar in the sense that they truly had their big breakout year this year. So all of them going over 1,000 yards, basically leading their teams across the board as wide receiver ones. Jack Bech actually started his career at LSU. I think you mentioned that, but he actually outproduced Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors as true freshmen. All of them, were just kind of sporadically used, but he, had more production than both of them. And obviously we saw what Neighbors and Thomas did. So, that's something at least. And then it took a couple years for him. He transferred to TCU, had his breakout next to Savion Williams. And so, yeah, a lot of interesting names and just kind of a lot of not knowing what to do with all of these guys is kind of how I view this tier.
Fair.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. But I've liked what Jack Bech has really developed into this last year. You mentioned his own. I think you said it was his one kind of big breakout year, which doesn't necessarily scare me, especially with a drop rate of 1.6%, showing
right.
If he's throwing the ball, he's going to catch the ball. So, we'll see how it goes. He did well at the combine, good shuttle and cone, so he's got the athleticism to him too. I think he really helped himself a lot, essentially since the Senior Bowl. Really, he elevated himself a lot since then with the game-winning touchdown and, like you said, the tragic incident and all that kind of stuff that he's kind of fought back from through it all, really.
So I kind of do these video, like the rankings in some order, right? Well, Jack Bech was one of the only guys that Jack Bech and Savion Williams, his teammate, I hadn't watched until like a couple days before the Senior Bowl. And I was like, oh, these guys are legit. Both of them.
Yeah.
Super legit players. So I'm glad that I got to watch that before the Senior Bowl. But yeah, I wasn't expecting them to be that good until, I watched that film and I was like, wow, like these guys can ball. So, this is a really fun, interesting group because I think, like Cam said, this is a hard group to decide what to do with. These guys could be higher, these guys could be lower, but I think for me, this was very uncomfortable to put them in this range, basically. And then we'll go to Tier 4. Tier 4 has 4 players in it. Savion Williams, Jack Bech's teammate, is first up. Savion is such an interesting player. He had 60 catches for 611 yards and 6 touchdowns, but he also had 51 carries, 322 yards and 6 touchdowns. He had multiple passing touchdowns. He's just the do-it-all guy. He's the gadget guy. Probably reminds you of Cordero Patterson-esque type of guy, but he's more athletic, bigger and more athletic, which is actually surprising. I was thinking, Cordero was one of the like outliers for everything you'd look at, but Savion's right there with him. 88.9% contested catch rate, which is 85.7% contested catch rate, which is incredible. Alignment versatility, quarterback 46 times, in the backfield 38 times, the slot 95 times, and out wide 345 times. Just weird. Craziness, right? But explosive guy, absolute freak. Absolute freak. And it's literally, I wrote absolute freak plus. So possibly the highest ceiling of everybody in this class at the receiver position, but he has a lot of issues of being like raw, super raw route runner, uses athleticism more than he actually uses technique. Gadget could have hindered his wide receiver development. And he needs to work on concentrated drops because he catches with his body. I think we've seen a TCU receiver do that before in the past and gotten in trouble for it. So Quentin Johnston and him need to figure out how to catch with their hands a little bit better to be more consistent, basically. Next guy up is Jaden Higgins, teammate of Jalen Noel. AP third-team All-American. I really liked what I saw at the Senior Bowl. He looked really good. Great hands, 2.2% drop rate, alignment versatile, inside and outside. Length is incredible length. I mean, 6'4", but he even has long arms for that. So he's obviously becomes a red zone threat for that. Footwork is really good. Good release package. I'm not sure he's your typical X receiver at 6'4". Like normally you're like, hey, just throw him outside at the X spot. But he has more quickness and agility to his game and change of directions than just a typical X might have. He just also, over the last 3 years, he's constantly gotten better, and I love to see that. So that was good to see. But he does have some cons. Yards after catch does basically not there. Run blocking is a problem. Release versus press is a problem. He just can't get off the line of scrimmage sometimes if he gets hands on. And then overall long speed, he's not the fastest guy in the world. The next guy is Alec Iomaner. Alec Iomaner is basically the red zone threat of the class to me. Not named Ted, but he's the red zone threat for the lower tier of the guys. And he's got the frame, he's got the high point, strength with the ball in the air, his catch radius is great, toughness and grit, and he's willing to block. He is a great blocker, which I really like to see out of guys like this. He has that post-up style of ability, when you think about basketball, he puts his body in between and catches the ball that way. And so contested catches are something that he's really good at. But he does have some issues with concentration drops. Getting off against press is also an issue for him because he's not the most athletic guy. Overall route tree. And then, he just, I think like his pre-snap, he just stands straight up and down, so he gets out of his stance slow. That's a coaching issue more than anything. I just want to put that out there. And then in 2022, he had a serious injury. He tore his ACL, MCL, and meniscus. So that's not ever a fun thing to have. But I did want to mention Alec Iomaner destroyed Travis Hunter in 2023. And everybody wants to point to that. So we'll talk about that in a second, too. And then the last guy on here is Isaiah Bond. And Isaiah Bond is someone that he is one of the hardest players to rank in this whole class to me. Because he is capable, and I know that he ran a slow 40, but his overall long speed is impressive. Just straight up impressive. And one thing I want to put out there, he is explosive athlete plus. I've had problems with Quinn on deep balls in the past, right? Biggest plays from Quinn Ewers were 33 and 34. Arch Manning comes in for 2 games or 3 games. I can't remember which ones. Those were his best 3 games of the year. 3 games, sorry, yes. UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, and Mississippi State. He had 103 yards, 75 yards, and 74 yards. Those were his best games of the year, and that was with Arch Manning, not with Quinn Ewers. So that might have hindered him a little bit. I don't want to make excuses, but I think that was an interesting stat to look at. Acceleration, he's a fluid mover, effortless change of direction. Like, I thought that he should have been a top 4 player coming into this year at the position. And now it's just like, I don't know what to do with him. because he had a disappointing overall career, even at Alabama. 48 catches for 668 and 4 touchdowns. And he did have an injury this year. So that was something that we can talk about before the Oklahoma game. He had that injury. But it's just, he's a really hard player to figure out. So I'd love to hear Cam's take on it because he is the Texas guy, Texas fan.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's frustrating to place him because of the fact that the expectation of on paper, and especially after when I watched the spring game, man, he stood out like, oh yeah, he's just gonna come right in and just basically take all the targets that Worthy did and a lot of what A.D. Mitchell did because they were losing both. And on top of that, there was a lot of young guys that they were going to rely on. So he was the guy. But it's tough because you see a lot of breakaway speed. He had obviously the infamous soundbite of him saying that he was going to flirt with or surpass Xavier Worthy's record at the 40 and then, did not deliver, ended up with a 4.39. He's just one of those guys that I don't know how much I can put on him because of Quinn Ewers' frustrating year. He also had a high ankle sprain in speedsters. It's always tough to judge production on that because he was just basically limited. But even when he came back, it just kind of seemed like his confidence wasn't there, especially in the semifinal game. Obviously, he had the big drop on third and medium where he just jumps when doesn't need to and it falls to the ground when no one's around him. But yeah, so he's one of those guys that I think is very interesting. Savion Williams, like you brought up, tough guy to gauge because you don't really see 6'4" guys getting 50+ rushing attempts in college, but that's kind of the way he was used and kind of frustrating with the yards per catch. But a lot of that, I remember watching him a lot, and it was just a lot of just bubble screens, and it's just like, why are you using your 6'4", 220-pound receiver as just the gadget guy? It didn't make a whole lot of sense. So and then Alec and Jaden, like you said, are really talented guys that kind of help themselves, one kind of dealing with some injuries, but then the other kind of inconsistent play and what have you. But he did stand out throughout this pre-draft process so far.
Yeah, I was real high on Bond coming into the year, building off his last year at Alabama, especially transferring to a Sark offense. I do think his confidence was hurt a little bit, and then like Cam said, with the high ankle sprain, that hindered a lot of his ability. Similar to how you said you think Savion will have a high ceiling, I completely agree with, or could have a high ceiling. I completely agree with that. I think Bond similarly could also have a very high ceiling compared to what we saw from him this last year, and where his kind of expectations are currently. I think he's similarly got that extra gear he could probably reach in the right situation and with the right coaching and kind of redeeming his confidence with it too.
Yeah,
and then we talked about Alec quite a bit, especially early on in our college football recaps. The guy can just jump over anyone. So I'm excited to see how he does with that. How he can develop more than just being that red zone guy that you can just throw it up to and assume he's going to come down with it, but what he can do between the 20s as well.
Fair. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go over to the numbered players that we're actually going to have their own individual screen for. Jalen Royals is one of my guys. For sure going to be one of my guys this year because he is an absolute stud. He only played in 7 total games, but I want to preface this because we're going to talk about a lot of guys that had some really, really good quarterback play. I mean, Isaiah Bond and another guy on this list both had Quinn Ewers, who's going to be picked in the draft most likely. You had Savion and Jack Besh had good quarterback play. You had Rocco Beck throwing to both Jaden Williams, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll. Like, Jalen Royals had by far the worst quarterback play. The first 3 games, they had a quarterback that then they benched because he was so bad. And so I just want to put this out there before we get to it because I'm about to talk about the splits between the two. And his first 3 games were his first 4 games. He had, I think, top 3 in yards per game this year at 119.1. Only played in 7 games in 2024, so that was something that we had to talk about. But he had a 4-week span between Temple, Boise State, UNLV, and New Mexico, where he had 40 receptions, 667 yards, 5 touchdowns. This was all with the new quarterback. Better than some players on the list. And then at Boise State, he actually had 9 for 211 and 2 touchdowns, which is the best team he played this year.
Mhm.
4 out of his 7 games, he had 100 plus yards, and they were all with that quarterback. So every other game, he was under that. And so I think that was a big thing. Is just like quarterback play really hindered him in the beginning of the year. He's explosive after the catch. When he catches the ball, he becomes a running back. He beats pursuit angles. He breaks tackles. He ran a 4.42 at the combine, so he's actually back to health after the injury that he had prior. He was used as a gadget player a little bit, but I think he can be a lot more than that. Obviously, I think they had to try to get him the ball because he was just the best player on their team. That's kind of how I looked at it. Alignment versatile. He is. Okay, this isn't not an exaggeration, but like his style of play reminds me of Jamar Chase. That's not saying that he is Jamar Chase or he's that good, but he reminds me in the style of play to Jamar Chase. Where's the same number? Long speed, he can take the top off, and he's levels of routes. You know, he's got short routes plus and deep routes plus. You know, cons, injury sucks. You know. And I think it might have affected him at the Senior Bowl a little bit because he did not look like the same explosive type of player I saw in film. And then I think learning how to get off press and body positions on deep balls at times are an issue. But I know it says 38.5 contested catch percent on here. But in 2023, he had the highest contested catch percent of any player in the NCAA. So he's a really good football player is all I'm saying. And I really like him.
He's also a fun story too because he did not even have a recruiting ranking coming out of high school, and he went and played his freshman year at Georgia Military College before going to Utah State, and he didn't play a single snap his sophomore year, and then all of a sudden breaks out for 1,000 plus and 15 touchdowns, and then was well on his way to passing that up, even whether it was bad quarterback play at the beginning, and then obviously a season-ending injury hindered him in his stats. But yeah, a lot of people are very high on him for just what he's shown. Really cool story, like I mentioned. And yeah, he's very, very interesting as being like one of the guys of the show from this position.
Yeah, his explosiveness and just pure athleticism is really fun to watch. Really good wide receiver. Hoping he bounces back fully from that injury. I think you're right. He probably was a little hesitant on it and bouncing back at the Senior Bowl. And then there's the obvious concern of how is he going to do against teams that are, or guys that aren't on the teams, Utah State was playing throughout the year. I think with his athleticism, though, that's not something I'm overly concerned about. I think he'll be just fine with it. It's just interesting because he's not one of those guys that, played for Georgia or something and have played SEC schools or Big Ten schools their entire career.
Yeah, he played at Utah State, and they went like 1-6 while he was playing this year. Like, they were bad.
Right.
And so that really hindered his just overall ceiling as a prospect to watch.
And it's hard to be good on a bad team.
And then, it's not going to change. Sorry.
Whoops.
I wanted it to. There it goes. All right, here we go. 6 is Trey Harris. And Trey Harris only played in 8 games this year. And we're going to have that, when we get to cornerbacks, it's going to be like every player didn't even play a whole season. So this position isn't as bad, but Trey Harris had the most receiving yards per game this year, other than, I think, Harold Fannin, because Harold Fannin plays tight end. He won't be talked about on this video, but 128.8, 7 touchdowns in 8 games. He was Jackson Dart's favorite receiver. He was a game time discussions preseason dark horse we talked about back in May. He's third team all SEC, even with only playing, I think, 3 SEC games total or something like that. Very, very minimal SEC games total. So he's just really good football player. Production, of course, is something that we always want to see to be good. He's a big body receiver. Kind of reminds me of the same build as an AJ Brown. If you just look at him, you're like, oh, that's AJ's build. He's not that good. He's not as good as AJ. That's not what I'm saying, but he's got that build. He's a big play threat, even knowing he's not the fastest guy in the world. He had 43 yards against Florida, 47 LSU, 57 versus South Carolina, 48 for Kentucky, and then he had a 70-yard big play and a 61-yard in the early games against their non-conference opponents. What I wrote down is kind of hard to he reminds me of a tight end playing outside. Like, his size, how he uses his body control to separate. He's not fast, but he's always open. It kind of reminds me of how some tight ends play the game. He's capable of running all the routes. He's a red zone threat. The biggest problem with Trey Harris, and of course he excels at 50-50 balls with using his size and stuff like that, but he plays for Lane Kiffin. And a Lane Kiffin offense is a problem. Everywhere you go, no matter what position you play, Lane Kiffin's offense is hard to gauge. Because I don't think Trey Harris did anything overly special, but I also think that he did everything he was supposed to do in the offense that he was in. So I can't be mad at him for being good at what he was asked to do. It's like sometimes I just wish there was more.
No.
You know, like I wish was asked to do more, and that would be more helpful because I think Trey Harris is also one of the guys that could be in the 15. Could be 15 on the list. He could be 3. I've seen him all the way up at the top. So it's like he's one of the hardest guys to rank. But I like him a lot. He'll be 6 for us. And I'm excited.
Yeah, he was another guy, low 2-star recruit that went to Louisiana Tech for 3 years and then obviously transferred to Ole Miss. Had a really strong, I guess, senior year, 985 yards and 8 touchdowns, and then obviously was on pace for being the Blitnikoff winner with 130 yards a game, and then suffered a lower leg injury, came back, scored a touchdown, 40 yards, and then immediately got hurt again to end his season and college career. But yeah, he's a big play guy, just not going to wow you in terms of athleticism, but he just uses his body so well to make plays. And so, yeah, he's a really guy that I could see having a really long career as a wide receiver too.
Yeah, I've said it many times, but I like to see guys who can continue to progress. And someone like him who had, his second to last year at Ole Miss, he was very good. People knew who he was by this year, and then he still came out and was on pace to. Actually, I think he did. Yeah, he had more yards this year in his 8 games than he did in his, I believe, 11 or 12 games he played last year even. So even with knowing how good he is and with the shortened season, he was still able to show that progression and improvement and be on pace to destroy really what he had done last year even, which was already a solid year. So yeah. I agree. I think he'll have a very good receiver career.
Yeah, he's one of the hardest ones to rank because so many people are just like, he's just not that good. And some people are just like, he just does everything right. And it's like, I don't know, I believe in him as a player, and I think that his style of play is a long-term type of style. Yep. So that's kind of why I think he is capable of being the number 6 player. I think he's in a tier separate from the next 5.
Sure.
So I think that's important. Going on to 5, it is going to be Matthew Golden out of Texas, and we have a big conversation to have about Matthew Golden because Matthew Golden's never had over 1,000 yards. He's 61.7 yards per game is his best, and he ran the 4.29. And that really sent him up boards, including possibly number 1 overall at the position, or number 2, depending on if you think Travis Hunter is a receiver and you have him number 1 above. So, I don't know. I don't know because I have a lot of reservations with Matthew Golden, but I think there's a lot of good about him too. Obviously, he's at 5. I just don't know if I love him as much as other people. Long speed. Is obviously good at 4.29. His versatile alignment is awesome. He's got great route running. Uses speed to set up, quickness at the top of his routes and breaks. He's a vertical threat. He finished the season against Georgia, Arizona State, and Ohio State extremely strong, and that is mostly why he's being boosted to me. And then also running the 4.29 at the combine, but he has issues too. He doesn't run block well. He's small. He has issues against press. Hands on. He has a hard time getting off the line of scrimmage. And the question also is, can he run certain routes? Can he run the in breakers? Can he run through the middle of the field? I don't know. And so I just have some more reservations than other people. He's still 5. He did get a little bit closer to the next tier, but right now he's actually in his tier of his own at in the 4th tier.
My problem with him is just purely how he is being kind of overhyped and where his draft position currently is, because I do really like him as a player. I love guys that play bigger than what they are, because 5'11", 190 on paper doesn't look like, oh, you can throw him contest catch balls, but guess what, you can. And on top of that, shining in the biggest moments, his best games came against the best teams, like Georgia in the SEC title game, 8 for 162, and then in the Arizona State game when they back and forth affair, 7 for 149 to score. Clemson, they didn't need to do much because they were dominating that game, and then Ohio State had 2 for 51 and then went out with an injury. His best games came when Isaiah Bond was not coming through and he was banged up and he made the most of his opportunity. But it's just one of those things, like, does that warrant being a top 15 pick and wide receiver 1 on most people, or not most people, but starting to trend on some of the most popular names like Todd McShay and stuff like that, putting him as wide receiver 1. Even Daniel Jeremiah, who is one of our favorites to follow and watch, has put him at wide receiver 1. And I don't know if that's warranted, but I do really like him as a player. I'm just a little worried he's being a little overestimated right now.
For sure.
Yeah, completely agree with y'all's analysis. He definitely stepped up towards the end of the year, and like you said, you look at his last few games, and his numbers, his yards at least skyrocketed. So he stepped up in the big games when he needed to. My one concern with that is against Clemson and Ohio State. He had 2 receptions for 49 yards and then 2 receptions for 51 yards. So on one hand, it shows he can make the big plays, get open, go deep. But on the other hand, will he be able to be consistent with doing that and being that guy at wide receiver?
Yeah, 3.6 receptions per game probably just won't do it to me, for me. So production-wise, he wasn't there, but he was the fastest receiver at the Combine, and he did end his year well. So, I mean, sure. I don't think he's top 3, but sure.
I think it's interesting that both the 2 lowest receptions per game out of anybody that we're talking about on this list, including the honorable mentions, are both the Texas guys.
They are.
That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to 4. It's Cam's guy. So Emeka Ibuka, his calling card is his route running. Absolutely nuanced route runner. Doesn't look the same on any route, even knowing it's the same route. Release packages are great. Hands and body movement are awesome. Getting through traffic, soft spots and zones, like he does it all when it comes to just being a route runner. He's probably restricted to the slot, so that's something that isn't necessarily my favorite thing. He has injury history in 2023. He had knee and ankle injuries. His catch radius isn't the best in the world. And then he doesn't have explosive long speed. He's not necessarily the best athlete. That's not what he's good at. He's not there to be the best athlete. He's there to, be a really good, really high floor wide receiver 2 style player. And reliability, willingness to block is something that I really love about him. So he does a lot of good things. He just doesn't have the athleticism, a high-level athleticism. Obviously, he's a good athlete, but high-level athleticism, and he doesn't have necessarily wide receiver 1 overall type of, wide receiver 1 on a team type of play to me.
Yeah, and with him, I think that's still okay because I think it's becoming increasingly important to have a great secondary pass catcher, whether that's an elite tight end, great wide receiver 2, because not only does it help elevate and keep pressure off of the wide receiver 1s of teams, but it just really unloads the offense. Like a prime example is Jordan Addison, who I don't view as ever going to be a top 15 receiver, but he looks damn good next to Justin Jefferson, and that's why they picked him as early as they did. But yeah, multiple 1,000-yard seasons. He could have been a French first-round pick last year, but he had a down year due to injury. Like you said, he struggled with that a couple of seasons. But, he just kind of comes through, and he's just the slow and steady guy that wins the race, gets you touchdowns, and moves the chains for you. I really like him about that. He reminds me a lot of Chris Godwin, of somebody that just is always going to be overlooked as a highly rated or talked about receiver, but he's just always going to do his job if he's on the field.
Yep. Yeah, I like him at 4, and mainly off of his floor alone. The guy's consistent. He can get open. He's really good. Like you say, he's not the most athletic guy in the world out there, but I think he's just consistent enough to where he can be a solid wide receiver too and have a good long career as a good wide receiver, and not even necessarily worried about him becoming that number 1 star wide receiver or anything. I think he's still just being as good and consistent as he is warrants putting him at the 4 here.
I also think he showed like what he can do as a wide receiver too in his career, because he played in 2022 and 2023 next to Marvin Harrison,
Yep.
and then Jeremiah Smith this last year. And those are obviously alphas for the college level at least. And so we know what he can do. Like you just said, his floor is good enough to be at 4. And yeah, I completely agree with that. The next guy is a guy I'm higher on than I think you two guys are, in Luther Burden. And it's because of if you believe in the 2023 film of Luther Burden, you are possibly putting him at number 1 or 2 on this list, because he was that special. 2024, he definitely took a dip. I'm not sure. Like, I don't have a bunch of reasons on exactly why that was, but he definitely reduced his production in the next year. But I will say that the whole offense also reduced their production by about 600 passing yards and 9 touchdowns. So it wasn't just him that took the dip. It was the whole offense as a whole. But what you're getting here is the all-ceiling player. Like, if you're getting, the all-ceiling team, we're going to put that out later on in this process. He'll be on it. He'll be on the all-ceiling team because he has that explosiveness. He can run all the routes. He's got punt returning ability. After the catch ability is top notch. He's just top notch at that. He was first in missed tackles forced, at 30 missed tackles forced, and that number doesn't mean as much until you take it in context of he only had 61 total receptions. So he basically forced a tackle at 50% of the time. When you're able to do that, that makes you that much more special of a player to want to get the ball into your hands. He's got the insane athleticism. He's got the strength, possibly the highest potential wide receiver on the list. But he does, have some alignment versatility. Alignment situation where he might just be a slot player at the NFL level. I think he could be an outside and inside player. That's kind of what the NFL is doing nowadays. But I thought he was shorter than 6 foot when I first saw him play. He is actually 6 foot tall. That was actually impressive to me. I thought he was probably 5'10". But he does have some issues of getting off of press, so if he is outside, that could be an issue for him. And I'm not sure that he can win consistently on deep routes. His bread and butter is getting short routes and mid routes, and beating man coverage against nickels and interior. He is a absolute problem in that facet of his game. So that's why I really like him. He ran a 4.41, which I thought was very impressive for what I expected out of him. And he's a running back with the ball in his hands.
Would you say that he is kind of a more athletic version of a Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that
I don't know if he has like the girth, so to speak, to run like 100 times like Deebo was doing as a kind of just everything. Just give him the ball at the line of scrimmage and let him do some magic. And obviously he's progressed and is now on a new team. But he had a good solid 4 or 5 years of just really strong productivity. Percy Harvin's another one of those guys that's maybe a little before his time. Wish he would have been in the era of like this where that was more and more common. But yeah, my thing is just the confusion of the dip in stats. Because like, for example, I mentioned that with Ollie Gordon of just like the short-term memory. And as soon as you said that, just like, don't forget about the 2023, like that's kind of what came to mind. But this was on a good team, whereas Ollie was just like, he sucked because of being behind all the time on a bad team. So it was just kind of interesting. And it's just like, why is it not there like it was the year before? And that was just kind of my biggest kind of question with him.
Yep. Yeah, I jokingly threw my arms up at the beginning. Emery knows I love Luther Burden as an athlete because the guy is insane to watch and extremely fun. If you want to watch a guy who is like, anytime he touches the ball, is he going to score on this play? This is a top-notch keystone guy of that. He did have Theo Weiss on the team too, who's obviously a very productive wide receiver. He didn't make our list here, but athletic guy. His numbers went up, so I don't know if it's some game planning and stuff there. But yeah, Luther Burden, like you said, I couldn't agree more with how high his ceiling is. If he does get back into whatever rhythm he got out of, but we expected him to be in, then he's going to have a fantastic NFL career. And I think he'll have a good NFL career regardless.
I also want to point out something that is so Luther Burden. It could have been namesake, but I do want to point out the fact that he was first team All SEC, and being first team All SEC has a little bit to do with the fact that when you are a coach, you have to game plan for a guy like Luther Burden, and you have to know where he is at any point in the game.
Yep.
Now, Theo Weiss was obviously more productive if you just look at the stats. But Luther Burden was the one that got first team All SEC, and that's because teams are worried about what he's doing and where he's at. And I think that it accounts to what we saw in 2023. That accounts to what we expected in 2024. So, I don't exactly know why there was a dip, but it wasn't just a Luther Burden dip. It was a full offensive dip. So I wonder also what happened just internally in the Missouri offense. And in the coaching staff in general. So I wonder if that has anything to do with it, because I wasn't expecting the whole team to also have a dip with the same quarterback, the same two receivers, a really good running back. Like, I wouldn't have expected them to not play as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then number 2 could be number 1 to most people. Tataroa McMillan. Tataroa has been top 5 on big boards I have seen. T-Mac is awesome. I really like T-Mac. I'm not here to down on T-Mac. He's just, not a first round grade player to me. And I've rewatched after we did our big board, and I still completely agree with that sentiment. And I believe that he is, a really good football player, 2-time All-American, like legit football player. But he has some I have reservations with him, and that's just kind of how it is. And everybody wants to talk about it. Like, he is alignment versatile. He had 105 snaps in the slot. He's obviously 6'4", 219. Red zone threat, catch radius, those things. He's got some of the best hands in the college football game, even though he has an 8.7 drop percent. Those numbers I didn't see on film the same way I saw with some other players.
Yep.
He's a smooth athlete, and he's open even when he's not. At least in college, right? Like, he's open when he's not still. So that's really good to see. I wish I would have seen more production in the touchdown category, because he is so good, but Arizona also wasn't the best team in the world. The biggest problem is long speed. He's not the fastest guy in the world. That's why he didn't run the 40. He didn't run it for strategically, I feel like. And then the other thing is consistently being able to separate is a problem for him. He is not having that speed makes it difficult, but also I just don't think he has the separation abilities that other players have, and other players have had at his size in recent years, even dating back to even Mike Evans style years and stuff like that. So,
yeah, he's an interesting player, especially in the pre-draft process, because I just haven't gotten the I guess pessimism on him of late, because he hasn't done anything to warrant it. He hasn't really participated at all in anything. Didn't do any drills at the Combine, Senior Bowl. I don't think he was a part of that either. But a lot of people had him in the top 10 as a first round receiver, or top 10 in the mock draft, and then everybody's dropping him. And it's like it's basically to the range of where we have him in our first board, which was basically the first player that didn't have a first round grade. But at the same time, it's like, well, y'all were so high on him. What happened in between this last month that has dropped him this far? Because, thriving on a bad team is just always, a positive thing to look at. Like you said, wish the touchdowns were there. But, I mean, against bad teams, going for 300 yards in the opener of the season, it can work when things are rolling in that offense. So he's one of those that I'm worried about his ceiling not being as high as some people think. But at the same time, even if I'm lower on a guy than another, like, I can also be fair and acknowledge, like, there's nothing to warrant any kind of dip right now in stock. Nothing's come out in injury in terms of all field stuff. He hasn't participated in anything to make you warrant, like, oh yeah, he's slower than I thought, or less athletic, or smaller, or any of that stuff. And yet he's where he is. So that's just kind of one of the things with him.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what he does at the Big 12 Pro Day. I saw he's going to be participating in that. It's March 18th through the 21st, I believe. And he did, from what I saw, he said he is going to participate in that. So I want to see if he runs the 40 and does some of the speed stuff and what all he'll take part in. I mean, when we watched him and did our college football recaps, it was every week. It was, all right, time for a quick T-Mac segment, kind of like the Ash Ginty. Time for this segment real quick, talk about how amazing he did this past week, what new he did, what big highlight he had. I still like him at the number 2 wide receiver. Like Cam said, I'm not sure why he's dropping so much, because he's still an amazing wide receiver. And like you said, arguably number 1, depending on who you ask and whatnot.
So the question I have too is just like I don't care if people jump ahead of him. You know, like if someone has like impressive numbers at the combine and they were in the same conversation already. So this is how I was getting annoyed, and I told you this the other day because I was like, how are you going to take a guy that was wide receiver 5 on your board based on the film you watched and move him all the way to wide receiver 1?
Yeah.
What kind of conviction do you have to do that? Because
Right.
me, if I have tiers for a reason, because if these guys are in the same tier, they can jump each other with really good combines and really good pro days and good interviews and whatever. You know what I mean? Like they're in the same tier, they're allowed to jump each other. But you can't just be like, this guy's 3 tiers below, but all of a sudden now he's all the way in the first tier at the top. So that's my problem with it, more so than like T-Mac, because he's not participating. There are going to be guys, even on our board, that are going to jump over him. There's certain players that have done really well. A guy that, what do you think? Jahad Campbell. He will probably jump over T-Mac, and it's because Jahad did well and T-Mac did nothing. But they're literally one place apart. You know, it's not like I'm saying, let's take a guy that's 10 places back and move him ahead of somebody.
Yeah.
Like, have some conviction on your film work more so than what happens, you know, in this process, because the film is 75% of the, you know, grading system to me.
Sure.
So I think that that's really important to really think about when you're talking about guys like T-Mac falling, because he didn't do anything. He should be at least in the same range as he was prior. So. Number 1. You all ready?
Yep.
I think everybody knows who it is at this point.
Yeah, I
right?
don't think there's any question.
Okay. Well, this is actually Travis Hunter on defense, as you can tell by his face mask there, but in the visor. Travis Hunter, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said. We're only going to talk about half of it today. Heisman Trophy winner, Walter Camp Award winner, Fred Biletnikoff winner, which is the top wide receiver. He is, funny enough, I think he's better at receiver. I think he's going to play cornerback, but I think watching him again and rewatching his stuff, I'm like, this dude is probably better at receiver to me. Now, with that being said, I think he has I think he probably has a higher ceiling at corner and a higher floor at receiver, if that makes sense. Like, just if you just kind of take it out of context, this is one player, but he lives 2 lives. You know, if I look at his receiving style, I think his floor is probably better, but I think his ceiling at corner is better. So that's something we can talk about, obviously, on another day. 96 receptions, 1,258 yards, 15 touchdowns, 3% drop rate. Dude was awesome. He has some of the better hands in football. He's a really good route runner for only playing one side of the ball, or for playing both sides of the ball and not getting a lot of work on the offensive side of the ball. And he understands how to get open, if that makes sense. Like, he understands how to find, like, soft places in the zone. He understands how to get off of press. He understands how to make plays. And that is very, very valuable. That is more valuable than just being, you know, like, being able to be better than probably your overall skill set because you're not working it all the time is something that we need to talk about more often. And that is something he does really well.
Yeah.
He is capable of making plays that he probably should not be making. Making catches. Like, of course, he's got the highlight reel and stuff because he made some amazing catches, and those should be talked about. But there's other plays where I'm like, wow, that was really impressive. Just him running an out route. and
Yeah.
how he got open on it. When I'm like, he doesn't even play this position, and he just put that dude in a blender, So
Yeah, Travis to me is just a very slippery slope because
Yes.
I just worry that teams are not going to use him how ideally I think he would most hit his ceiling, which is kind of like, situational pass catcher, whether it's 2 minute drill, playing from behind, all that good stuff, and then just basically your biggest position is corner. And like you said, you actually like him more as a receiver, but acknowledge that his ceiling could be higher as corner. And I think it's apparent because you can get a dime a dozen a 1,000 yard receiver at this point in football, but there's not a lot of great corners out there, and even those that can have all pro caliber seasons were afterthoughts or just considered bust the year before. I'm thinking of J.C. Horn, who just got paid today, as an example of a guy that just for 3 years it wasn't anything, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, he's pretty solid. So I think it's basically a money, like if you're just talking money, he could probably make the most out of receiver for the length of his career. But if you're talking just accolades, I think he could be an all-pro at the position and become a Hall of Famer based on being a cornerback. But receiver-wise, I think if they just kind of put him or thrust him into a role where it's more so that's the priority, it might become a Reggie Bush thing, like I've said before, where it's like, yeah, you're productive, but second overall, you can't just be a one-time Pro Bowler and 1,000-yard season kind of thing. And with Hunter, if he's just like 800, 900 yards, that's awesome. But as a top 5 pick, like Corey Davis could do that, and he was considered one of the bigger wide receiver busts in recent years. So that's kind of one of my things with him. I love him as a player. I think it's an interesting dynamic of how to play him, and it's more so a draft value thing, more so than how I think he can succeed in the NFL kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, he does everything well. As a wide receiver, he can beat you on, get a screen pass and run past you. He can jump over you. He can run past you on the deep route. It's going to be really interesting to see how teams use him, who drafts him. Do you think who drafts him is going to be dependent on how they want to use him? Like, how do you see that playing out for him? Kind of the chicken
Well,
and the egg thing.
surely there's only like 5 teams that could draft him.
Yeah.
Like, if we're just going to be honest. So if we're
Right,
talking
right.
about, say, Tennessee decides that that's their guy,
Sure.
like, they should play him at corner 100% of the time, like Cam said. Actually, let me think of a team that shouldn't play him at corner 100% of the time out of the top 5. Because, like, really, I don't think they're. Let's see. No, all of them should play him at corner 100% of the time,
Yeah.
and then play him at receiver with the amount of snaps that he can take, because that's
Yeah.
true. Like, you're gonna get way more, and like Cam said, you're gonna get more out of him
Yeah.
at corner, and that's how I feel too. I'm 100% on board with that. I just think he is a better prospect at the moment at wide receiver than he is a corner prospect. But like I said, I think his floor versus ceiling. His floor and his ceiling are closer together on the wide receiver side. His ceiling is actually unlimited on the corner side.
Sure.
So he could be considered one of the top 5 all-time corners because he's that good at corner. But I think focusing it could help him, obviously, so much more than what he's currently doing.
Yeah.
So all the teams should basically play him at corner.
I do think it's funny though because I think it's very safe to say he will be a top 5 pick. It's just you don't know the team. But what's funny is if I'm looking at the updated draft odds and the top 3 teams of the top 5, obviously that have the highest odds to draft him, I'm just like, y'all are the least likely teams to take him. And I'm thinking Patriots are the favorite right now at plus 225, and I just feel very confident that they're going to go with a offensive lineman of some sort. Obviously, they already have an elite corner in Christian Gonzalez, and then they just signed Carlton Davis today.
Yep.
So they don't have a need. The Giants are the second highest odds. They're the one team I'm certain are taking a quarterback. So I don't know why they're the second highest. And then the Titans, I guess, if they move back, I can see a scenario where, he just falls into their lap at 3 or something of that nature. But if they stand put, they're not taking him at 1. Like, they're either taking a quarterback in Cam Ward or an Abdul Carter. So the Browns and the Jags, who are basically both plus 500, those are the 2 most likely spots for me. And they're the least likely of those 5 teams. So I thought that was very interesting.
then somehow he falls to 6, and the Raiders take him.
No,
would
you're
be
taking
just
Jindy.
Crazy.
That's what we said in the running back video, right?
If Travis Hunter is there, I think we're taking Travis Hunter. Like,
Well, obviously.
you know what I
obviously.
mean. But
I just don't think he will be
think
there.
he'll
I
get to
know
6, yeah.
Ashton will be there.
Yeah.
Or will he?
He's going to the Browns at 2.
Oh, imagine.
Just rerun it with Saquon. Yeah, I think that Travis Hunter, like we've kind of hit the nail on the head. Like I think that's how he should be played, and I think that at the end of the day, he has some of the highest upside of any player. Definitely at the corner position, but any player at any position, and that's why he's actually the number 1 wide receiver. If he was just a wide receiver in this class, he'd still have a first round grade. It wouldn't be different because
Right.
he's that good at it. And we'll talk about him on the cornerback video because I haven't set that one up yet. But when we get there, and it's like the last video, so you're gonna have to wait for that one. That's gonna be the last video. But
It's a
when we
doozy.
get there, you'll see how we feel about him at the corner position. So, yeah. All right, let's rank these guys versus last year's class. Ready?
So this is like almost an opposite thing of what we saw with the quarterback and running back video, where we just had every single thing from 2020. Or no, it's the same actually. Sorry.
Yeah. It's
Move
more
forward.
similar to
Proceed.
the last year's class with the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I meant to say just the running backs because all of them were in the first 14. If you watch our running back video, go watch that, and then obviously it's a flip with the top 4 at least up top.
Yeah, so last year's class was pretty elite when it came to the wide receiver position. We talked about this, about the Brian Thomas, and, I think there's a recency thing where you need to go back and watch old players play. Like, go watch their film before you, try to rank them against someone else. And I went back and watched Brian Thomas's film, and I was like, holy shit, this guy's good. Like, all I could think was, there's no way I'm putting either Tetaroa or Travis Hunter above them. It's at the wide receiver position. Like Brian Thomas is that guy, and we thought that last year, and we've been right so far. And it just followed, and I'm glad I went back and watched his film because I was like, it was a question mark between him and Tetaroa that we had talked about before, and then I went and I was like, no, it's not a question. There is no question here. Like this is a big difference, honestly, between the two of them. So. As you can see, the top 4 are all 2024 guys. Then you have 4 2025 guys. And then you have A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, and then Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden is 11th here. He would be possibly 4 on some boards. It's a big difference.
Yep.
It's a massive difference. So that's something I just wanted to point out. And then you can see that there's some 2025 guys rounding out the end of this board. So, yeah.
Yeah, with last year's, just kind of looking back on it because it was such a great class. Like there was, the top 4 were just consensus and whatever order you wanted to put them, and then after that it was a lot of a mixed bag of just all over the place. And that's just kind of the epitome of if you just go back and re-rank these guys, it would be completely different after 4. But I mean, you see guys like Tez Walker or Xavier Legette just having really rough rookie years, but then you had late round guys that did awesome. Ladd McConkey, obviously, we didn't expect after no production in college to just all of a sudden be a 1,000-yard threat. Well, he was. Or guys like A.D. Mitchell, which we really liked, but he just went to the worst situation for himself. Troy Franklin, another guy that we expected in a wide open receiver room with a teammate of his in Oregon, and then just obviously being behind a lot of guys was very interesting.
Yeah. I don't like ranking, I mean, these are all obviously prospect rankings. We had Tez at 8 or whatever it was in our rankings last year, but I mean, Ladd was 28th overall or something like that. He was, firmly in the first 32 picks. So, I like 2-year, 3-year sample sizes on wide receivers most of the time because the first year, when you don't have elite players like we have in this class, it normally takes them a little bit longer to adjust to the NFL when it comes to the wide receiver position. So we will see if these guys do better this next year in their sophomore year because a lot of sophomore receivers normally improve, to say the least. Yep. But yeah.
One last quick question in terms of a way too early fantasy. And I asked you this a couple months ago, so the answer might be the same, but you have a late first round pick, and there's a guarantee that you won't get both. Who are you siding with right now between Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr.?
Oh, what time is this of the year? What time of year?
What do you mean?
Like after the draft?
No. I'm talking fantasy, purely baseball purposes. This
Well,
year, if they're both,
love
they're
to know
both,
who the Giants quarterback is.
pretend it's Cam Ward.
Okay, Brian Thomas.
Brian Thomas?
Give me the
Fine.
touchdown equity.
I think one of the early strategies, if we had a late first rounder, are going to be crossing our fingers that we can get both at the 1-2 turn. But I think both of them are going to rise up to where it's hard to see that. But if we start doing it early, which we're going to, start a little bit earlier this year, I think we kicked it off in July last year. If we don't do some combo ones, in June, I will certainly be doing some solo ones myself,
Right.
and we'll try to get more samples and stuff like that for you guys. But yeah, that'll be a very fun team and start if you were able to do both.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's a good question. I'm personally I side with Brian Thomas just because I like the touchdown equity and the big play threat. Because I think Malik Neighbors is more of a gonna catch probably 20 more balls for the year than Brian Thomas, but might have 4 less touchdowns. So that kind of makes me side that way.
Cool.
But yeah, so let me stop sharing. Oh, there we go. All right. Well, we appreciate y'all hanging out with us. We're going to be coming out with these videos all month. So we're going to do 11 of these videos, 11 ranking videos, and then we're going to have one mock draft post this crazy wave of free agency that we're seeing right now. And so we'll have that, and we'll have some new information on everything, and hopefully we'll get to put these players in the right places.
Yeah, we can't thank you guys enough if y'all have stuck with us through this hour. Didn't expect this position because of it not being the deepest going in an hour, but it truly did, and it was a really fun discussion with a lot of these guys. If you haven't already subbed, please do join that road to 250 that we got. Join this community. We're talking about football all off season long. We're not missing a day, even though we got 6+ months till football season. So a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of fun to have, and we want y'all to join.
Yeah, don't forget about Dustin. Hold on. Don't forget about Dustin doing March Madness.
I am doing
Yep.
March Madness, releasing
March
monthly
Madness.
videos, and we're about to start doing more than one a week, based on the conference tournaments and once the first rounds of the tournament starts, recaps and new projections and predictions and all the Cinderella fun of it all.
Mm-hmm. But we really appreciate y'all. Go like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Comment anything that y'all thought we did well, we did wrong. Guys that you're higher on that we're not. Maybe we didn't even talk about a guy that you think needs to be on the list. So yeah, go hang out in our comment section, and we appreciate y'all hanging out with us. And we'll see you on the next one.
See y'all guys.
Thank y'all very much.